Don't you enjoy reading a good book, learning new things, meeting exciting people, seeing wonderful places, or reading a good story with amazing characters on fantastic adventures? I know I enjoy those kinds of books. But have you ever wondered, where did this book come from? Who is the author? Why did they write this book? What's the story behind this story? I'm Randel McGee, and I want to share with you how I came to write and illustrate my book, Zhang Heng and the Incredible Earthquake Detector, published by Familius. But let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I am a puppeteer. That means I make puppets and do puppet shows. I'm also a ventriloquist. I'm a storyteller, an author, and an artist. And above all those things, I'm a husband, father, and grandfather. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the background of this book. You see, in 2016, I was doing storytelling and teaching at an English magnet school in Taiwan, which is close to China. And while I was there, I visited a museum where I saw a model of the Incredible Earthquake Detector. I was fascinated by it. And later that year, I was asked by a museum in California to write a special storytelling presentation all about earthquakes, the people who studied them, and people who lived through earthquakes like me. And so I started doing all the research I could about earthquakes and those who studied them. That's when I learned more about the man who had created the Incredible Earthquake Detector. He lived long ago in China, and his name was Zhang Heng. As I learned about Zhang Heng, I was very impressed with his story. He was a very intelligent man and studied all kinds of things around him. He was also very creative. He was a great engineer and inventor. He made lots of machines and things to help the people in his time. He was a writer. He wrote poems and stories. So he was a very, very creative, artistic man. But with all these talents and abilities, I was impressed that Zhang Heng was still a very humble person. Even though he lived in the court of the Emperor of China, he was basically interested in creating new things and not involved with the politics of the court. But there were some in the court who didn't want Zhang Heng around, and they were always plotting and scheming to try to get rid of him, to put themselves up, to make themselves more powerful in the eyes of the emperor. And this kind of story, I thought, needed to be told. It had creativity, it had persistence, it had political intrigue. And so I started writing the story. I sent the story idea to the publisher Familius. And they wrote back and said, "This is a good story idea, let's work on it together." So I wrote out the story incomplete and sent it off to the editors at Familius. Now, editors are the people who will read the story and help the storyteller, the writer, make the story even better. When they read my story, they gave me suggestions on places where I could cut some of the words out or add some more to the story to make it clearer. Then I would follow their suggestions, rewrite the story, send it back, and thus it came back and forth until we have the story that you see in the book today. Since the story takes place in ancient China, I thought it would be best to illustrate the story in the style of the traditional Chinese shadow puppet theater. As a puppeteer and paper cut artist myself, I thought this would be the best way to share this particular story. In my library at home, I have some books from China about Chinese paper cutting styles and Chinese shadow puppets. You'll see similarities between some of the characters in my story and characters that I found in those books. An important part of putting this book together were the storyboards. Storyboards are the pictures that the artist puts together to go along with the words of the story. Some of the sketches I started off with were very rough, almost scribbles. But then I went through and made them a little nicer, a little fancier, so that I would get a better idea of how the story would look in the book. And I added color because that helped me understand how the colors would come together for the book. Once the story and the storyboards had been approved by the publisher, I started to work on making the puppets and scenery in the style of Chinese shadow puppets and paper cuts. This was fun for me, and I started off by drawing all of the characters on art paper. Some of the puppets would have moving parts, and so I had to draw them into different little pieces that I would then put together to make them move. A lot like action figures that you play with, where they have movable parts. This also made the illustrating of the book very easy for me because I could use the same puppet again and again in different scenes in different poses. So that meant I didn't have to draw each page with a different position for the characters. Once they were drawn, I would color them in with watercolor crayons. These are special crayons that once you add a little bit of water to them, the colors smooth out and blend together. And so once they were drawn, I would take a moist brush and blend the colors together. When that had dried, I would line the puppets with brush pens in different colors. And then I would add a little bit of highlights and texture to the puppets. Once it was all colored in, painted, I had the job of cutting them out. Here's a close-up of what I used. A sharp X-Acto knife and very sharp, tiny scissors for all of those little cuts. All of the little white spaces that you see in the figures in my book were all cut by hand. And after an hour or so of cutting, I would be just covered with little tiny shreds of paper. I'd just brush them off and start again. When all of the puppet pieces were cut out, then I would take a needle and thread and just gently sew them together so that they would move, like you see in the dragon here. I also cut borders for most of the pages of my book, just like I had seen in the Chinese paper cutting books. However, the borders that I cut were not used in the final book, and that's part of the publishing process. The artist and the publisher have to give and take a little bit each way. Once everything was ready, I had photo sessions. I worked with a couple of photographers, but there was one in particular who did all of the photos that you see in the book. For you see, all of the pictures in the book were first photographs, and then they were printed in the book. In my workshop, I rigged up a scaffold above a light table with some ladders and some boards so that the photographer from Familius could climb up and take a picture down on the light board of all of the characters like you see here. Once all of the pictures were taken, they were given to the art directors at the publishing house. The art directors arrange all of the pictures as they will appear in the book. And sometimes they'll zoom in on a picture, perhaps just to get the faces. So at the end, it goes to the printer, who then prints all of the pictures and words on pages, binds it in a hardcover book, covers it with a nice decorative jacket, and that's how you have your book. In almost every page of the book, I included dragons. They're a very popular theme in China and Taiwan. So in this picture of Zhang Heng and the emperor out under the night sky, you'll see that there's a dragon on the jar the servant is holding. There are two dragons on the emperor's costume, if you can see it. The emperor is holding an instrument in his hand, and it has a dragon on it. If you look very closely, you might be able to see that in the stars there's a constellation of a dragon. So how many dragons do you see on each page? How many are in the book? You can let me know in your comments to my video below. If you would like to order the book, please visit my publisher at familias.com, which is listed here. If you'd like to learn more about me and my books and my performances, please visit my website at mcgeeproductions.com. And if you would like me to visit your school, library, or other organization with an author's visit and actual copies of the puppets that I made and some other information about the book, you could also contact me through my website there at McGee Productions. I want to thank all those who helped me in publishing the book. My publishers, of course, the editors, the photographers, the art directors, and all those special people who helped support and encourage me as I was writing the book. Thanks.